There's a basic rule that I've come across, and this is actually by a film and TV and film director, Steve Stockman, and he said it so well, I'm just going to continue to quote him. He said, when it comes to video, if it's not good, it's off. And I've talked to a number of leaders, I've talked to coaches, consultants, speakers, and authors, CEOs, and the interesting thing is some of us realize that we can do better. And the other side of the coin is those who are watching us, what is their perception of how we're showing up? Video is so new, we may not be aware of how we're being perceived. And I've talked to several people actually who have said who are working inside corporations, who have said that they have to watch a 10-minute video by their vice president, and it's painful because the vice president doesn't have any camera presence, doesn't understand to look at the camera, doesn't understand that what they're saying, that who they are and how they show up is just as important as what they're saying. First of all, I know one of the questions I always get, and the question has to do with virtual backgrounds. And I'll be the first to say sometimes they're necessary. But what we might be getting wrong is, number one, they're not on message. Number two, they're distracting. And number three, we're not using a green screen. And why are those three things important? How do we fix each one of those? Well, our background, first and foremost, is telling a story. And it's part of that story that we want to be able to communicate when we're with clients or when we're with our teams. And the question is, what story are you telling before you say a word? So just thinking about that, and I know I see you, Joanna. I want to acknowledge you as well. Joanna and I've worked together in the past. It's so great to see you. But this was one of those things that she and I spoke about for a presentation that she was giving, is what is in your background. And an easy fix to this sometimes is literally flipping your desk. And I had to do this initially even with my own space, is sometimes the space behind us is too big and too distracting. And what we need to do is we need to flip our desk so that our back is, that we have a wall behind us and we limit that frame of view. So if you think about it, your video presence on a technology standpoint comes down to 5 things: your camera, lighting, audio, framing, and staging. Your background is your set. And so in the movie business, they talk a lot about production design, and you need a production designer. And the production designer's job is to make it look and feel as though you're in a place that makes sense to the story. So I remember hearing, I often listen to the Debbie Millman podcast, and she had a production designer on there who was working with both Dolly Parton, and I believe that she worked on the Aretha Franklin movie as well, or one of those, and they had to make it seem as though it was from that time period and to recreate what was true and authentic to the story. But the set, your background, helps to tell your story. And so Kathy and I worked on this initially as well. And so her, at some point, she might be willing to share her before and after. But we narrowed the view because she has a few values. Number one, she's a reader. Number two, she's an author. And number three, she's all about this global perspective. So now the question is, do you see that as part of Kathy's story? She's not saying anything right now, but it's clear that she's a writer, she's a reader, and she has a global perspective, all in her background. So this would be the easy fix in terms of your virtual background. Now, there are some cases, and I believe Lena, did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, yes.
So Lena's in a situation, and Kathy kind of shared this with me. There are always exceptions to the rules, right? So Lena's in a right now in one of those situations where blurring the background is essential. And sometimes that's necessary. The other interesting thing, Kathy and I were speaking about this as well, and sometimes we are forced to take a call from our car. So how do we handle something like that? And to be honest, I typically, unless I have established a relationship with the individual, my first impression is not going to be from the car. If we need to, I'll start with a phone call, to be honest, because I don't want to give the wrong impression, number one, and I don't want to give too casual of an impression by having the background be my car. But sometimes taking the call from the car and being on video is essential. In those situations, it's important to actually give an audible. Call the audible and just say, you know what? I'm either in traffic. I'm not able to take the call from my office. I needed some privacy, and so I'm taking it from my car. Anything to be able to give your audience or whomever you're speaking to some indication that this is the exception, not the rule. And in those situations, my guess is 99% of the people out there are going to be very understandable about this. But remember, as Kathy pointed to, this is about influence. I work with individuals who want to have more influence. And we have to take these considerations, we have to think about these things and be intentional about how we show up in order to be able to maximize our influence.